So get whatever you need to get comfortable here. We've got a lot of questions, as I said, and I want to speak to a few things that are top of mind right now. This is going to be a little bit of an everything show. Hello, Oklahoma. Hello, Ontario. Hello, New Jersey. Rhode Island. Awesome. So I'm just looking at my notes so I don't forget. First things, housekeeping, really important. If you have not yet signed up for my email list, I really want to urge in a healthy mama bear way to get on our email list. It's super easy to get on it. You go to my site, there's a little box at the bottom. You put in your name, your best email. Make sure that we send you an email, that it doesn't go to spam or trash. So you click the thing so that you say you want to get my emails. The reason why is with all the uncertainty with economy and everything, I don't want to lose contact with you. And I know it might seem odd to think that this platform would go away and we don't know. And I'm not saying that to scare anyone. I mean, I do so much of my work in business and I talk to my students over these platforms, but I also have all of their emails so that if I ever needed to one by one send emails to people, I could do it. So the other bonus to being on the email list is each week I release a new video. So not these videos, but my weekly content that goes up onto YouTube. It also goes up onto my blog on my website. And we give you that. There's an article that goes with it, usually some other notices about what I'm doing, whether I'm teaching that week. I'll give a review of these and also musings, quotes. Of course, our workshops right now, our in-person workshops are kind of tentative for 2020. So it's just a way to stay in touch. So again, up to you, but if you're feeling like you want to know, if you want to stay in contact with me, get on that list so that we can reach out to you in that direct means. Because as we know, even on a good day with social media, we might not see everything that someone posts because of timing, when we might go in, etc. Okay, so next thing is, and I'll talk about this in our questions and answers. I'm seeing a lot, and this is not new for me to teach this, but I feel like it's really important to impress upon you the utter importance of working at the nervous system somatic level right now and really doing the heavy lifting, feeling what you're sensing, not trying to breathe it away, tap it away, journal it away, eat it away, binge watch TV it away. And I'll say that with an aside, there's nothing wrong with watching a show, obviously eating, having a glass of wine, focusing on our breath, using tools and resources when we may need to stay contained and connected and calm. And this is like capital and with flashing neon lights. If we have not resolved the old fear and terror, maybe even elements of horror in our past, things that we saw that were really tough to look at, traumatic events that we were involved in, adversity, abuse, bullying, unsafe environments growing up, medical surgeries, natural disasters, parents who were in wars who never resolved their own trauma. I'm just going through like the laundry list of all the things. Losing a pet that we loved when we were really little and our parents not allowing us to grieve that pain. The list goes on. So things that were really intense when we were young, when we were maybe in utero, and maybe what our parents experienced and didn't heal, because chances are they did not. This information and this way of working with our systems, it's very new. And this is more than just general self-care, mindfulness, exercise, eating well. Because I have a question today about someone asking, I've done all the healing. Why am I still having triggers? Why am I still having panic attacks? Why am I still having terrors in the night? Why can't I calm myself down? And it comes back to regulation of the nervous system and the old stuff that's still trapped in our system, and all of the old stuff that is trapped in our collective society of humanity here on planet Earth. So there's a lot of cleanup occurring, and I believe, and this takes bravery and courage and knowing that we're going down a pretty deep hole, but I think it's important to do our work at this deep level because it will offer more capacity and space for everything else that's out there. And it's so interesting. I just have to tell you what I'm looking at. I have my computer here in front of me. It's a big desktop screen. And you know how sometimes there's images of screensavers that just pop up randomly? I am literally staring right now at that view from space of the Earth. So I think it's pretty cool that I'm staring at this globe that is planet Earth as I talk about this. So I just had to share that. So even if you think about that image of we're all sitting on Earth, we are on the planet Earth, and we're all connected. And we're feeling a lot of the pain, a lot of the suffering. And we have always felt this for history, but we didn't know what it meant. And I think we really know what it means right now. So if you are 100% new to my work, this might be brand new to you. I have done this work for 20 years more, working in health, nutrition, fitness, the nervous system, neuroplasticity, movement. I've sat across from really intense stories that no one would wish upon anyone. Trust me when I say. And this stuff doesn't heal on its own and with time. It does not heal on its own and with time. I'm really slowing down right now, not to scare you, not to bore you, but to really slow this down so that you feel that and you digest it and you integrate it. I love that everyone is here wanting to learn the education and be with me, and I hope you keep coming back. And the work has to be done. So a lot of the questions today are asking, can you give tips? Can you give techniques? Can you offer me a reason as to why I'm still feeling this and that, and why is my digestion off? Why do I faint easily? How do I get rid of the memories? So all of these questions are valid, and my remedy, if you will, my solution, the way that I will encourage you to heal these things will be to find a way to either work with me through my programs, through a somatic practitioner that is trained, hopefully in something called somatic experiencing. That's the work of Dr. Peter Levine. My other mentor, Kathy Kane, her work is called Somatic Practice. It's working with these deep nervous system levels. And the reason why I got online and stopped my private practice, just to give you an origin story, was it wasn't enough to do one-on-one work for people, for me at least. It was rewarding, and we did a lot of important heavy lifting, working through traumas, images, memories, which is important. It's important to do that. And we kept getting stuck because there wasn't enough foundation, there wasn't enough education, and it was not efficient enough for me to sit and teach everyone the same thing every day and teach the same exercises, the same practices. I call them neurosensory exercises. It was not time efficient. It just wasn't time efficient. So I say this with full sincerity. If you haven't started yet working on this apprenticeship of your nervous system, I can't say that. If you haven't started and you want to, and you're wanting to work with me and my team, start with one of my programs. And the only one you can get into right now, it's a self-study course that still has connection with people through our forums here on Facebook. It's a private group. It's called the 21-Day Nervous System Tune-Up. It was curated from a big collection of my work. People are in there shifting their lives, changing their lives, amazed at how well they're doing in this time of crises because they are working on the deep stuff. They're not they're not trying to get rid of the hard to feel feelings and the hard to see images from their past. So you can definitely ask a question here, Katie. I'm going to get to some of the first questions. My cough drop has dissolved in my mouth. Hey, Suzanne, you say, I've been a psychotherapist for over 20 years and had so much therapy for decades, and you're 63 years old, and it still triggers better since starting your work. Oh, okay, so it looks like the triggers have shifted. That's great. Yeah, and we have to remember that there's nothing wrong with our system going into activation, right? Just like if there was a loud bang outside of my house, I might have a little bit of a spark, but then it's going to come back down. Granted, my system is regulated and can self-regulate that activation. So being activated, being stressed, experiencing trauma, seeing traumatic things is not the bad thing. The bad thing is when we don't resolve it and it stays stuck in our system. And this is the toxicity that we're dealing with, not just individually, but globally right now. Things are stuck. So in terms of finding a practitioner, I see someone asked about finding someone in LA. I don't know all of the people in the world. I wish I did. Wouldn't that be fun? I did a video a little while ago, and Crystal can pop this up, how to find a good somatic practitioner. Watch that video and then do your research. You've got to treat it like you're interviewing someone for a job, because essentially you are, right? So you have to, just a few of the tips, but I really encourage everyone to watch that one. You have to make sure they have the credentials. You have to make sure that they are confident in their own systems, that they are regulated, which I will admit is not easy to find. So just because someone has the credentials does not mean that they are regulated and that they are good at what they do. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I get a lot of emails from folks saying that they have not had success, even with people who have training that I have. And this is so individual. So you have to interview the person, you have to like the person, and you have to ask the person, what is your plan of treatment? How do you want to work with this? And if they stumble, if they don't know what to say, don't work with them. So there's a level of confidence that a person, I believe, needs to have to work at this deep level. So definitely check that one out. That question was from Dan. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get to a question on my papers here. And Dee Dee asks, what if the banging keeps going on? So what you're referring to, I think, Dee Dee, is if I keep hearing a banging outside of my house, well, we have to find a way to make that stop, right? Because that is not conducive to being able to live in a house. And this is being a very literal example. We know in, it's going to sound like a strange metaphor, but the way that people interrogate criminals is they'll play loud music. And I know this because I have friends who are Marines, and they'll say that one of the training regimens they are put in is they're put in rooms with horrific sounds and crying babies and loud noise to basically teach them how to be with that stress. However, it's also teaching those people to go into shutdown, right? As one of my friends says, I just go to my happy place and tune it out. So if we can't get out of the situation, we may need to do that. But if there really is something outside that is intense and won't stop in terms of a sound, then, I mean, this is very specific. A person needs to move. I was watching a video of someone who had to move where they lived in New York City because there was a street under construction for like 20 years. I might be exaggerating that. And him and his wife and family, they had to move somewhere else in the city because they couldn't sleep. They couldn't rest. That is real and escapable attack. And so it's important to find ways to have our environment be as safe as possible, whether it is the people we live with, the family system we live with. Currently, right now, while we know that there is a very strong and contagious virus going on right now, if we are safe in our home and we're doing the precautions that we are being told to take and we're keeping distance from people, we will be fine, right? And if we have more fear in our system, then we won't, because our immune system will suffer, our system will brace, the flow will stop, and then we are more susceptible. So know that susceptibility to anything is exacerbated when we are in more fear, when we are in more stress. And one way to get out of current events is to stop watching the news. Only tune in when you have to, tune in a little bit, but right now, I think it's important for us to focus on what we can control, what we know is good for us, resources in our world. There's never been more opportunity to experience online learning, online healing, online dance classes, online meditation, connecting with people over online forums. So someone says, excuse me, is it safe to move through terror during this time of social distancing, or is the possibility of being re-triggered too strong? Is self-soothing more appropriate? Katie, it really depends on your system. And I don't know you personally, but let's just say you are new to this work and you don't have the capacity to handle terror and the big emotions that you're feeling, then you do want to do things that can self-soothe, that you know work. We might have to bring in some of the tools that we know, while they aren't going to heal what's there, it'll at least keep your system at bay. So again, it really, really depends on where you are at on this journey. So it really depends. And this is why it's super important to, again, my kind of spiel at the beginning, to find a way to start doing this work, whether with me or through a therapist online. Because when we have capacity, when we know what's going on in our physical system, in our somatic system, in our somatic experiences, we can handle a lot of bad stuff. But when our capacity is really small, and if you haven't yet, Katie, watched my 3-part healing trauma video series, Crystal will pop it up, just go over there afterwards. It explains this concept of capacity and stress and how we need to build our capacity. We need to not put more stress into our system, and we need to do both at the same time so that we can stay in flow. So also, if you've done my work, that's wonderful. For those of you that have done a lot of other self-care work, mind-body work, I'm going to be very adamant. The work that I've put together within my programs, it's not typical. I've blended somatic experiencing, somatic practice, and the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais into the work that I do. It is not typical mindfulness work. It's not breath work. It's not grounding work. It's not just movement work. It isn't inner child work. It is very, very much structured towards the biological autonomic nervous system and the peripheral nervous systems, our movements, our ability to connect with the world and put it all together. So it is very different. And so I just want to really put a pin in that, because it is different. Okay. One question that came in last week, it's a longer one and it's an important one, so I want to get into it. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of this. So this is from a woman who is experiencing a lot of sciatica pain. Historically, they were high into marathon running. It looks like they even won a few Olympic Games, which is pretty cool. So running is like their love. It's their way of connecting with their systems. I know from working with a lot of Olympic athletes and people high level, so this was my other lifetime in my 20s and early 30s, the level of training that a person has to go into to make it at that high level, in my opinion, is not good for us. That's a bold statement, but it's true. And I know that because I was quite a high level athlete, but I was nowhere near Olympic level status. So that's one thing I'm going to say, because I'm going to bring my own experience back in a second. And I've worked with gymnasts, triathletes, people that have pushed their bodies past the comfort zone, past the system's ability to heal. Typically in such situations, there's a lot of shutdown going on. There's a lot of freeze energy. There's a lot of dissociation from the body to push. People will feel an injury and they'll keep pushing because they know they have that race or that game or that event. So I'm going to just put the foundation here. So this person has been walking and it's been keeping them going, but they really want to be able to run again. It also looks like, so there's sciatic pain, which is the nerve that comes out of the lower spine and it goes down the leg. When it's debilitating, it's really bad. It's a sharp, piercing pain, and it can even numb out the entire leg, the foot. So it's a serious thing. It also looks like this person, their doctor or their trainer, it looked like they have what we would call adrenal fatigue. This makes sense. When we have pushed our body to the limit, not just for 1 year, but for like decades, and we also live a life and we have family and we have a work life environment, our adrenal glands will burn out. And we know this. We call it adrenal fatigue, adrenal overwhelm, pick the name, it's what it is. I've done articles and webinars on this, so Crystal can post them in the comments, or if you're watching this on YouTube, on the Show More section. When our adrenals are dried up and burnt out, and they can't produce the chemicals that we need for proper waking and sleeping, it also usually means that our system is not going into good repair at night. It's not going into true rest digest. So you have to follow with me here. There's a lot of pieces I'm putting, and I'm going to bring it all together. So adrenal fatigue, body that's been worn out, body that's probably been taxed, the system can't repair. The nerve cells aren't going to recover. The tissue around the spine, around the bone, the tendons, the ligaments. In our spine, we have these things called discs, right? Our spinal discs. They need to, at night, they need to puff up and get zhuzhed up, as people would say in Jersey. They need to get rebuilt. The fluid has to restore. And when that does, with really deep restorative sleep, we get that sponginess back. And it's not just in the discs, it's the bone, it's everything. So if we are pushing, and if we're living a little bit more of a shutdown response, and our hormones are a bit off because our adrenals have been pumping so hard, we're not going to recover. We're not going to repair all the tissue in our body. So the question is, will doing this work, doing the programs that I teach, at this point, you can only get into the 21-day nervous system tune-up because we only run Smart Body, Smart Mind once a year. So the question is what can I do to get back? What can I do to recover? And so there's a few things. Again, it comes back to regulating the nervous system. It's one thing. It means getting the system rested. It might mean that for a period of a year, it depends on the person, there needs to be low impact activity. There needs to be less intense activity because the adrenals can't mount enough of a response to even go for an intense run. We actually had a question about this last week regarding exercise, so this fits really nicely to that one. So we need to I think of like a tank, a car with a tank of fuel. It's like the engine is, the gas tank has no more fuel, no more petrol, but the oil and all the fluids that make the combustion engine go are gone. It's like, think of think of a machine that's dried up, no oil, no fluid, no water, nothing. That system, that car, whatever, it can't run. The human body is not identical to that, but there's some similarities. So for our system to recover, we need to replace the fluids, kind of metaphorically speaking. We need to replace the repair. We need to polish things up. We need to rest. We can't rev it at the same level. And for a human who has needed that level of intensity to be alert and feel good, it's going to be tough because our pattern, our conditioning is to push, is to go. And so it'll take some mindfulness, some very kind self-talk that knows that with time, this system, this engine, this organism will rejuvenate. We know through the power of neuroplasticity that the system, the human system, can recover like crazy. It's kind of like when you think of the thing that's coming to mind is Chernobyl, when there was that nuclear explosion there back in, gosh, was that the 80s? I was a young girl. Um, the whole system, the whole area was decimated. And now with time, things grow back, things recover, things rejuvenate, just like forests and that have forest fires, given time and air and water and nutrients and animals and worms and bugs, everything comes back to life. So this can be recovered. It takes time. The other thing that's going to be important is realizing the level of stored traumatic stress in the tissues. I'm going to speak to that for a second because this is something that I experienced myself, in that I did lots of sport, lots of impact, lots of high adrenaline, ski racing, paragliding, figure skating. I don't know how many times I've probably had whiplash in my life and concussions. And it wasn't until just this past December that that old stuff started to come up and out, because my capacity was big enough to handle all the old gremlins that were still sitting in my tissues, literally. And so that came out in the form of some pretty bad headaches, some pretty bad fascial tension, that was the old remnants of my system trying to protect my spinal cord and my brain tissue. Intense bracing patterns, very intense, nausea, dizziness when I went to sleep, heart pounding in the middle of the night for no reason. This all was coming up and out. And obviously I'm fine and there's more fluid in me, but it was, for some whatever reason, it was that moment was, we're gonna give you these old presents, Irene, from past, that you never had the knowledge, the awareness, nor the support to heal them piecemeal. I can guarantee you, when I finished figure skating practice when I was 10, my mother didn't draw a bath and massage my body and let me cry. The coaches, the moment you fall on the ice, they have you get back up right away. Unless you're bleeding or you've broken a bone, you don't get to sit out. You've got to keep going. This is a very typical way that we've taught kids and athletes how to be. And it transfers to all sorts of things, right? Kids that are sad, angry, grieving. The example I gave at the beginning, if we had a pet that died and we weren't allowed to fully scream and grieve and cry, and we weren't comforted by our primary caregiver, that grief, that sadness, and maybe the anger and irritation towards the family member that didn't help us, it will come out as adults when we grow our capacity. And here's the thing, we want it to come out, because if it doesn't come out, we know through the research it will make us sick. This is what causes us to be triggered and feel things that we don't know how to contain and digest and integrate. So to go back to this original question, it was someone, again, recap, very much athletic in their younger years and older years, experiencing some pain in the body, also what we would classify as adrenal fatigue and burnout. The question is will the work that I do help? My answer is yes, and it is something that will take time. If I use myself as an example, clearly I've been doing this stuff for more than a year, but it took until this last December. It was actually an osteopathic session that opened up those old wounds. And I had been having little bits of it prior to that, but that little bit of extra support, along with all the foundational knowledge I know, not freaking out when these things come up in my system and being with them, allowed that to move up and out. And I haven't had that kind of experience. No more night terrors, nothing. It's all shifted. Does that mean that every single ounce and drop of those events from my earlier life have completely exited? I have no idea. This is not something we can't measure, not yet at least, as far as I know. Maybe some other cosmic world knows how to measure this stuff, but I do not know how to measure it. We know how to measure it based on how the rest of our system is doing. Is our mind working well? Are our self-care practices online? Is our digestion working? Is our immune system working? Is our skin, the largest organ in our body, clean and healthy? Or is it expressing something that is something coming out? For females, is our reproductive system, is our monthly cycle, if we still have a menstruation cycle, is that ticking over nicely? Can we sleep at night? Is our appetite normal, whatever normal might be for you? are our relationships calm and collected and communicative? So these are all things that tells us that we are on the right track. And it doesn't have a sequential list. Some people, when they start to regulate their nervous systems, they won't find that their digestion or their deeper systems shift first. They might find that they're a little more interested in going for a walk. They might be a little more interested in cleaning their house. They might be a little more interested in calling up an old friend and talking. They might be more interested in creativity projects that they've left behind. So that's a sign that the higher brain is starting to experience less of the survival stress that's been clamping on the system. Whereas other people might find that, yeah, their sleep is a bit better. Their wounds, when they cut themselves, they heal a bit better. They're less tight and stiff when they go to move and dance, or maybe they're feeling a desire to move and dance and they never have before. So yes, Susan, losing hair can definitely be a sign of high levels of stress. And it, along with the fact that we lose hair every day. I mean, with this hair that I have, you don't want to know how much comes out, but there's general loss of hair because the hair is dead, just like, it's like our nails, and we have to keep cutting them. But excessive loss of hair can be a sign of high intensity stress. Okay. Just going to come back to the comments, you guys, here in the chat. And so just to wrap up that question about exercise, because this person wanted to know, like, I want to get back to running again 30 minutes. I'm afraid that I won't be able to run. And it comes back down to trust and letting the system heal and recover. And doing it in a way that isn't pushing the system. So walk, run, as much as that might not give the same kind of endorphin response, do what we can do little bits, increment it bit by bit. It's just like if someone were to break their leg and it was in a cast for 6 months, you're not going to ask them to go running up a flight of stairs. You're going to start by probably walking in the pool first, or doing very low impact movement, gentle range of motion. The system has to build back up so that the tissues, the bone, the tendons, the ligaments, the discs, and the nerve conduction, it all builds back up at the same time. I hope that makes sense. We can't just go all out when the system doesn't have that robustness and that sponginess that it needs to run, for example. Okay. Cool. Okay, I'm glad you guys like that topic. It can take years, and just know that it can. I said this last week, I'll say it again. When we don't go at a slow, easy pace and follow our body's needs, it will take longer to recover. It's like if you have a cut on your hand, I use that example, and if you keep picking at the scab, if you don't cover it with a Band-Aid, if you don't keep the skin supple and moist, that wound isn't going to heal, right? There's ways that wounds can be aided. And so it's the same with getting our body back to activity. We can't just jump right back into running for the sake of a marathon. What is it? 42 kilometers, 26 miles or so. Okay, I'm going to have a little bit of drink here. Hey there, Fiona. Good to see you. Fiona is one of our SBSM Smart Body, Smart Mind members. And yeah, you say love the gentle movements that we are learning in SBSM. Yes, they're very important movements to kind of get things sparked back. Okay. Okay, Mel said, just going to read some of your comments, you guys. I've only just now, after 7 years of left side chest pain, started to regulate it. Yesterday there was a loud bang, and today I had a slight pain, but that's a massive improvement. Awesome. Okay. Okay. Next question. So this is from email. So again, as I said at the beginning of this, if you're not on my email list, please get on it. We never know when these platforms might spontaneously disappear, and I want to make sure that I can stay connected to you all. So get on that email list. So this is from someone on our email list, and they ask, I don't know whether my intense feelings are due to dysregulation of the nervous system or a big ego. I love this. This is so good. I sit politely in adult conversations trying to fit in, but inside I'm angry. I can be angry that I'm not the center of attention. I expect people to make me feel special and included without having to do anything to earn it. I get angry like a child that I can't have what I want and simply because I want it. These feelings are so strong and leave me feeling suicidal with despair. Is my nervous system causing these emotions, or is this an overactive ego? So the first thing I'll say, I want to make sure that if anyone here is feeling a level of despair where it's moving towards wanting to end your life and suicide, please get some support that is professional. On my site, we have lists of crises contacts throughout the world. There are some that are text-based, there are some that are online-based, some are phone-based. So, again, I'm just saying that please take care of yourselves. In terms of this is not an overactive ego. This is early childhood trauma. This is developmental trauma. And you said it, you said the exact same thing. I expect people to make me feel special and included without having to do anything to earn it. So when we're young, if we do not have respect, empathy, nurture unconditionally from our primary caregivers, we will not feel safe. Our needs will not have been met when we are young. And then as adults, as children, as teenagers, till the day we die, we will continually try to find that nurture, that connection, that parent that never listened to us when we wanted to talk. And so this is actually very common. And as human beings, when we are older, it doesn't necessarily mean that our emotional state is matured, that it is evolved. And that is not really our fault per se. It's the situation we were raised in. It was the environment. So I'll give you an example. If we sat down, it's just one example, there's like a million, but if we were to sit down at dinner and it was taught, and this is a very classic thing from back in the day, children are meant to be seen and not heard. Right? The classic, sit there, don't talk. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. If you cry, you're going to go to your room, et cetera, et cetera. All those things are essentially trapping a human, a little immature animal, which is a human, this human's emotions, connection. If we are told to go to our room when we are hurt and sad, we are going to have a rupture in not only connection, but safety. And we want it to be built well in those first few years of life so that then we can be independent, we can be alone, and we do not need to have anything to praise us to feel good about ourselves. So there's a very important, exquisite time in those first kind of 5 years of life where we need to have that connection, that safe haven. We need to have our boo-boos kissed when we hurt ourselves. We need to be given time to get ready, to get dressed. The other thing that has really messed us up is the classic school system. I think it is so fascinating right now that everyone's up in arms because kids can't go to school, and yet that system is a cause for many people's psychiatric, mental, and chronic illness disorders later in life. Because when we are judged and we are loved based on how well we perform academically, creatively, physically, and say sport, it robs us of our natural intelligence. We don't figure out who we actually are. We become our personalities, not our individuality. And so, not an overactive ego. This is a sign of unresolved and unhealed early trauma, developmental trauma maybe. It's even societal trauma. It can be, there's such a thing as religious trauma. I mean, if you know anything about some of the hardcore religions, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question for that person. My suggestion is to really do some work, to work on those earlier wounds. Again, that's what we do within my work, within my programs. The course that's really well tuned for that is my Smart Body, Smart Mind 12-week program. We're in it right now. We're in week 5. But the prequel, the prerequisite, if you will, for that is the 21-day nervous system tune-up. That is a starting point. It's the starting blocks to really understanding how to feel the system, how to feel the somatic experiences, how to build up the capacity to sense the utter despair, the unsafety, but stay connected and grounded and contained and in the here and now. Again, just a reminder, when we've had experiences that are big and traumatic, but also insidious micro traumas, like not being able to speak up or cry when we want, it shuts the system down and it puts it into either a deep freeze or when we go into a deep shutdown or freeze, underneath that are all the fight, flight, survival energies that never got to get out, right? Think about kids. Most kids don't punch back. They don't speak back. Some do, but then very quickly they realize, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to get into trouble, I'm going to get hurt, et cetera, et cetera. So very quickly we learn as young people what to do to stay safe. Unfortunately, while that is adaptive in the time, it is maladaptive long term. It will make us unwell. And like I said at the beginning, it does not heal with time. Okay. The next question is from Michelle. And again, this was sent in via email. And they ask, can this help someone with POTS disease? So I'll voice out what POTS is. It's postural orthostatic tachycardia symptoms. So basically it means when you go to move orientation, typically when you go to sit up or stand up, the heart rate and blood pressure doesn't match the change in gravity to get the blood and oxygen up to the brain. And so what happens is, because our systems are so bloody smart, no pun intended, the system will go, oh crap, we can't get blood to the brain, which needs to go there for oxygen, right? Because if the brain doesn't get blood and oxygen, it dies very quickly. The respiration is going down. We're going to shut it off. We're going to shut it off, and we're going to shut it off to the point where we're going to make you pass out or get really dizzy, so you have to sit back down. So this work exactly does that. It helps the system reboot and get out of that shutdown. I learned this to give you why I have the right in knowing about this. Again, my work with Peter Levine, studying somatic experiencing. He's kind of one of the first people that really put on the map that things like POTS, things like autoimmune, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, intense digestive troubles like IBS, Crohn's, Raynaud's syndromes, chronic regional pain syndromes, really intense physiological crazies within the body, to use a technical term, are a result of the system, the nervous system, being dysregulated. Again, that fight, flight, freeze, the survival energy is going, and then the shutdown, just trying to stomp it down because it can't handle. Like if we were to only live in survival that is high activation, we'll wear ourselves out. And this is why over time, again, when we're young, and chances are, I'm going to make a assumption that there was stress early in life, whether it was abusive or just this general air of unsafety, It could also be medical traumas that occurred repeatedly when we were infants and young. It could even be in utero trauma. So when we have that early kind of adversity, what occurs is the system, again, that higher, that not higher brain, that I don't like to say lower brain because it's not that it's lower, that more primitive reptilian unconscious brain that is the protectorant of the whole body, it says, we can't handle pumping at this level. We're going to shut you down to preserve energy. But in that shutdown, it also slows all systems down. It lowers the metabolism. It's like we're going into unhealthy sloth mode, right? It's so slow, and humans need lots of oxygen. We aren't like the reptile. We're not like an ant. We are mammals, and mammals need a lot of blood, a lot of oxygen, and movement to stay healthy. We can't live underwater, right? And so creatures that live underwater, like the real deep sea creatures that can like be down there forever and don't really need to go up and get air, they live in a highly prominent, it's called dorsal branch of their parasympathetic. They kind of live in this interesting shutdown state, but for them it's healthy. That's their thing. We're not like them. But if we sense that our system cannot calm down the intense activation of survival, the fight flight, it's going to shut down into freeze. And that's what occurs in POTS, in this phenomena where the system just says nope. A small example of that would be someone who sees blood, someone who sees something really horrific. If the system ramps up into activation so quickly and the person doesn't know what's happening, again, the autonomic nervous system is just going to cut the switch and say, we're going to pass you out because we can't handle this level of intensity. So 100% yes, this work can help with that. And also know that this is something that takes time, just like everything else. It's exactly the same in that it takes time. It ain't a quick fix, but when you do the work well, and I call it neuroplastic healing sequencing. I talked about this in another vlog where I talk about the 5 stages of neuroplastic healing, so be sure to check that out. We can't go into more advanced practices at the beginning. It's like, I always say this, it's like learning a second language as an adult. I can't speak German. I couldn't go into a village in Bavaria and start talking and ordering my food and talking to the old people. I couldn't, even if my life depended on it, I could not do it, right? And so we have to look at the nervous system healing process in the same way. If there wasn't early regulation on board, we're not going to be able to do these higher level skill sets that where the system needs to be highly differentiated, big capacity, big traumas coming in. I can process this, I can put that back out. We need to start with baby steps. But when we start with baby steps and we do it well and in sequence, you will be amazed at how the system can repair and recover at any age. The other thing that's very important is mindset. While in my work I don't work specifically with mindset, there needs to be a deep knowing and belief and deserving of being well and healthy again. I talked about this in a video a little while ago. I think it was titled Why We All Can Heal, but Not Everyone Will. And I dip into this need to really be like, I deserve this. I deserve wellness. I deserve goodness. And when that hasn't been the case, our wires will keep bringing us back to the bad. It'll keep putting us into victim role. It'll keep self-sabotaging ourselves because it's what we know. We only know those patterns, that map, and we need to change that map, and to change that map takes time. Okay, I'm going to head back to the comments here. I'm going to have a little more tea. I'm just reading through the comments, you guys, if you can't see the comment page. Francesca says, what is the best way to cope with? I think you meant to write guilt. Don't think you meant to write quilt. I think it's guilt. Guilt, it all comes down to the same thing. And guilt is a more advanced, it's not even really an emotion so much. A lot of people kind of connect that with shame, but You can't guilt a 2-year-old. You can't. They don't have the higher brain structures to understand what that means. Kind of like blackmail. It's just, it doesn't work. But with a little person, you can emit energetically a lot of toxic shame, and they'll feel it in their bodies, right? They'll feel it in their cells. So it comes back down to whether it's guilt or toxic shame. And I did a video a little while ago, Francesca, on the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. So I'm going to channel the fact that maybe there was a bit of a question there around shame as well. Be sure to watch that one, because I don't want to repeat everything. But if it is more of a shame response, that sits in our physiology. It sits in our posture. It sits in how we feel safe or not safe. And it comes back to regulating the nervous system, working with this somatic system. This is where classic talk therapy, journaling, while it can be useful, it's not getting under the rug, so to speak. It's not getting into the closet where all these somatic experiences have been stored, not just in the posture, that's where it can be, but in how our immune system responded when we were young, how our gut responded when we were young. Kids that are put under stress, what's one thing that they often say? My tummy hurts, right? The way our immune system can adapt, and I say adapt with air quotes when we're young, is if we know that there's no opportunity to be robust and energetic and be exuberant and creative, what do you think the system might do? It'll get sick. It's like, well, I'll get love if I'm in bed and always sickly, right? And so that can carry with us into our older years. Okay. Good question. So this is a question from Giuseppina. Do the same principles apply to mentally draining work as physical work? So this is probably in reference to the question I answered a little while ago around the athlete whose body was probably a little worn down from not enough recovery and adrenal fatigue. It can, but it depends on whether or not that person was also taking care of their body or not. So if we're someone, I do a lot of mental work. I do a lot of writing, a lot of admin. I sit at this computer. I'm constantly thinking. I'm constantly creating, but I really love my work. And I take care of my body when I'm doing it. I'm aware of where I'm sitting. I'm moving all the time. I'm making sure I'm hydrated. I exercise when I'm not here. I have good relationships. I sleep. I get fresh air. So it depends on how we're balancing that mental work with taking care of our physical body as well as our emotional body, etc. Someone who, I'm just pulling this idea out of my head, who works a 9-to-5 job that's methodical, monotonous, not really sparking up any creativity, but it's just, say, crunching numbers, and they're disconnected from their body because maybe they don't know how to pay attention to it, or maybe they don't like what they feel. There's like a level of disgust. I hate this work. I don't like it. If a person is in that train of living, then that mental work is impacting the physical without a doubt. There's a stress response happening. The system is probably living in a bit of shutdown, a bit of freeze to cope with that work. And so this is where it becomes really dependent on the person. Okay. Carrie says, I agree. My son works best in movement and in kinetically. So working with our bodies, totally. It's interesting too, because again, when we have had that really good self-regulation and we learned it through our primary caregivers growing up, our robustness as humans is pretty strong, and we can be very, very focused mentally, but we're not disconnecting from the body. And so if we didn't have that, we might need more movement, more somatic attention when we're doing more like intellectual work, because it wasn't baked into our system in the first place. So everyone's a little bit different, but I am of the belief personally that all humans, we all have certain unique sparks. Genetics is real. I also believe that when we have got solid regulation and when we were given what a human needs to be healthy, secure, regulated, we're actually able to do all of it. I believe that we become not just visual learners, kinesthetic learners. We become good with our sound, with our sight, with our feeling, with our energy, with our psychic ability. I do believe that we all have the same building blocks inside to be quite adaptable and creative at multiple things. But the way that we get conditioned, oh, that she's the athlete, she's the bookworm, he's the creative one, that person is good at cooking, so we're not going to teach all those other kids how to do that. It's we get pigeonholed into these spots, and then if that pigeonholing is what gives us connection and love with our primary caregivers, we will hold on to that like it's our lifesaver, right? It'll be our lifesaver too. It's like that's the thing that's going to keep me alive because I know I'm really good at that. But then what it does is it closes down this entire potential that makes us, in my mind, more whole as an organism, as a human organism. I think, and I've talked about this in the past, human beings, we do not even have an ounce of understanding of how powerful our mind and bodies actually are to heal, create, be psychic, be intentional, be energetic, because of all of the conditioning, because of all of the deep, deep yuck that not just us personally holds, but globally we're holding. We've been stunted in our growth potential, right? We've been stunted. And I think that I'm smiling because I feel like we're going to get that back. We're going to get that potential and creativity back very soon. And it requires choice. It requires believing that we have this potential that hasn't been untapped. Okay. Someone asks, this is from Katie. This is wonderful. And I I think you meant resonate with so many of the topics that you are talking about. I'm an adult of child from alcoholics and divorce. Is this considered trauma? 100%. 100%. That poses the situation of things were not safe when you were growing up. And while maybe the mom and dad who were alcoholics and got divorced, maybe they never laid a finger on you, maybe they fed you, they gave you a house, they gave you ski trips, books, they took you to school. Like, again, we get lost in thinking, well, I had all these things, I shouldn't be complaining because I wasn't hit, I wasn't abused, I wasn't tortured, I didn't watch mom and dad fighting physically. We don't need to have those extremes to have our little tiny system shut down and shift and become malleable to stay safe. So 100%. So I'll encourage you to dive into this work, Katie, if you haven't already, because just knowing that is the first step. And a lot of people won't understand how, as far, I'll be honest, I have not met anyone yet who has not experienced some form of trauma, collective trauma, societal trauma, school trauma, familial trauma, ancestral trauma, past life trauma. I haven't met anybody that has not experienced something like that. And so we're all in this together. This isn't anything to be ashamed of. It's just the reality right now. I did an article a little while ago on I think it's the 9 things that we might not consider traumatic, but are. I'll really encourage everyone to look at that because you might be surprised. The other thing I don't talk about a lot, but I do mention here and there, are surgical traumas, anesthesia, dental work, anything where we're having to be held down, put under, and we aren't aware of what's going on and it's not being done in a titrated, slow way. That is highly traumatizing to the system. Near-death experiences, near chokings, near drownings. People think if we get into an accident and we walk away alive that it wasn't traumatic, and that is not true. So again, I talk about that in my healing trauma videos, the 3-part series. So if you haven't done that, if you're still not sure you want to start with one of my programs, start with that free training because it gives you some really solid teaching, research, the science, and how this all wraps together. Okay. Okay, I'm going to come back to my questions here that I have. Okay. This is from Holly. This was from the Facebook page. So thank you, Holly. And I'm just going to close. It's funny, as I've been talking to you, because I'm on Facebook, I'm getting notifications of every single other person that's going live on Facebook. So I'm having to continually move those aside. So there's a lot of talking going on the internet. It's good. Okay, this is from Holly, and Holly asks, I've had so many conflicting opinions on how to deal with my panic attacks. Can you point me to a technique that I can use when my panic attack is peaking? I have a terrifying urge to flee. I have agoraphobia for 3 years now. That's the fear of leaving home. And I've had 3 therapists that are not somatic, and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm starting to feel like I'm never going to get better. So Holly, first of all, kudos to you and bravery to you for asking this question and still looking for answers, even though you've gone through 3 years of this and 3 therapists and things aren't changing. This is really common. And the reason why it's common, if you've been listening from the beginning, is that to work with this level of panic, which is essentially terror, so it's our survival responses that are basically turning the switch on in our physiology, saying danger, 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 things aren't safe, no one is to be trusted. Typically, when they come on, and I'm going to make an assumption that they come on out of the blue, it's old trauma. It's stuff that we experienced probably before we even were able to verbalize, talk, or make conscious awareness and conscious memories of what is occurring to us. And this is why it can be absolutely terrifying, terror, because we don't know where it came from. And I've experienced this too. So the thing to understand, and you say, I have a terrifying urge to flee. We can, when we feel these, go into the motions of fleeing. That might look, and it depends on your body and your robustness, feeling that panic and running on the spot. It might mean sitting in your chair and punching the air. It might mean doing jumping jacks. It might actually mean going to the park and running down the grass just to get that energy out. The key is that you feel that desire to flee. You stay connected to the here and now. And if you haven't done any of my online resources, you can pick up some of the free ones that are audios where it teaches you how to stay connected to the ground, how to stay connected to the environment, how to stay connected to yourself. Because we want to go into, if we choose to go into renegotiating and letting out that desire to flee, we must, I'm going to say that with a capital M-U-S-T, we must stay connected to the here and now. Period. I'm pausing on that for emphasis. If we don't, we lose the medicine of responding with that flee. If we don't stay connected, we run the risk of dissociating and disconnecting. We also run the risk of re-traumatizing ourselves. So if you haven't done any of the basic practices, again, whether it's some of my free resources that we have here or on my site that teach you how to stay connected to the here and now, or through one of my programs, like, again, the 21-day tune-up, if you haven't done some of these basic practices, I don't recommend going into a flee response the next time you have panic. I recommend working on some of these other things before, so that you have a little bit more robustness and foundation for staying connected. And so this is why things don't get better with general therapy, is our somatic imprint of unsafety and terror ain't in the brain. This brain of ours is amazing and we cannot live without it. If someone was to take out my brain, I wouldn't be here. But it is also an end organ. Just like the digestion, just like the immune system, just like the bone, the kidneys, while we need everything to tick, it doesn't drive the show when it comes to some of these unexplainable qualities of panic and terror and anxiety that come up. it registers in some of the processes. I know some people will be like, well, Irene, what about the amygdala and what about this? Of course, there is chemical reactions coming through there, but it originates in the somatic physiology. And this is something that is very new. And trust me when I say that a little baby that is being poked and prodded with needles, because let's say they had surgeries when they were young, or maybe a parent that treated us roughly, or maybe we watch mom and dad fight all the time, that's going to impact our somatic system, and we're going to feel like nothing is safe. So there is no one technique. That's the other thing, because you could try some of these things, and I'm not saying this to discourage, but I'm saying this to be real. You might be like, that doesn't feel right. My body actually doesn't want to run. And maybe you might track, and this again takes practice. You might start to track your system and be like, whoa, this is more like deep, deep anger. Or, whoa, this is actually deep, deep pain, like emotional pain, sadness, despair. Or it might be, oh my God, this is that all of a sudden memories come of that accident you witnessed that was horrific to see. I don't know what it is for you because I don't have my mind reading skills on yet. But this is again why I can't stress enough. I can't give a remedy because only your system knows what that might be. And it could be one of many things. So I've spoken as if it was a flea, and you gave me the hint, there's a terrifying urge to flee. So it might be that, but it also might be that flea is there because something that you saw that was really scary when you were young and you couldn't, for example. So that's, again, just a hypothetical. Okay. I'm going to get to one more question here. Maybe a few more. Where are we at? We're at 1 hour and 10 minutes. Give me a second, guys. How's everyone doing? Is everyone staying connected to their bodies as I talk? It's very, very important when we're moving through this information to stay connected to the body. Because if we don't stay connected to the body, we run the risk of obviously not integrating this and taking stock of what might be bubbling up in our own system as we go through this. So one of the things that my students will always say is that even just learning the education, like deeper education than what we get here, but like deeper education, there's kind of this ability to also process stuff that's in the system by doing the education. And this is where we have to have a very good observant eye on our internal physiology. If we don't, we're going to miss it. Hey, there's Suzanne. Thanks for your words. You just said Suzanne's one of our alumni. Best money I've ever spent, my sister and I ever spent doing your training. Thank you. And to know the training that we're talking about, it is not a professional training. It is for the general people, you amazing general people. There are many therapists and practitioners that do the work that I offer online, again, the paid courses, but it is not a certification to work with other people to do trauma work. I have been studying this work intensively since 2004. I started learning human science, biomedical science in 1993, which is a little while ago. So it's super important to know that right now, I'll speak to this really quickly, and I did another Q&A on this a little while ago. I think it's Crystal, you can find it. It's on somatic practitioners and all that. But we don't have a proper global federal governmental certification for people that do the work I do. So if I go back to how to find a good somatic practitioner, you have to do your homework, because those of us who are really in it, who are doing this work legitimately and have the training, we've had to carve our own path. We've had to create our own university degree, essentially, because there isn't one. This is very different than becoming a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. the worlds of healing trauma at this somatic level, working with the body, working with everything that I talk about and teach my students. There is no professional training for that, not yet, at least. One question, Irene, do you do somatic training so therapists can become certified? Not yet, Mel. It's definitely on my radar. It is something that I know my students and followers have been hearing me talk about for a long time. And I'll speak to that quickly. The reason why I'm not just jumping into it is the infrastructure I need for that to occur is not there yet in my company. And it really comes down to time and capital, i.e. money, because if people come into if I was to create a training right now, I'll just speak candidly, and it's say 2 years long or 3 years long, and it's like intensive, there's no structure set up for my students to get a student loan the way you would in a university or a college setting, right? And so there's kind of like, we're in this phase of realizing to create that kind of training, it isn't just a 12-week training over 3 years, where you meet a few times a month. It can't be that way. If my colleagues and I who work at the level, again, that I do, were to count, and maybe one day I'll do that, the amount of hours, study, money, travel time, practicum time, teaching like this, it would probably amount to more than 2 medical degrees is my hunch. And I think that's important to really voice, because we can't go into this work with only like a weekend training workshop. And I'll be very clear, there are many people who are claiming to be trained in working with somatic trauma at the somatic level, ask for their credentials. And if they say, oh yeah, I did a weekend workshop with Peter Levine at Kripalu or at Spirit Rock, and I learned a little bit about the polyvagal theory through a webinar with Stephen Porges, or even if they say, oh yeah, I've done Irene Smart Body, Smart Mind, they're not trained to work with trauma at the somatic level. So anyway, Mel, yes, you need proper funding to establish that. I do need proper funding. We'll see. Maybe the change in our current economical system will make it such that something occurs in that realm. You never know. Put a prayer out to that one. Okay, I'm going to do one more question that was sent in by email again. So you guys, one more time, get on email if you aren't already. Oh, I might do a few more. I want to get to the email ones. Okay, this is from Fiona, and Fiona, let me take a sip of tea. Okay, so you've just finished watching a video of mine on flow and settling our survival energy and helping kids. So my inquiry, my kids are 20 and 15, so you've got older kiddos. I know for sure that I passed on fear to them as they were growing up. Fear, my anxieties, phobias. So yes, you're probably right. It's impossible to not transfer trauma that we have as adults if we have kids, it's impossible to not transfer it over. And I don't say that to scare the parents. It's just how we're built, right? It's just how we are built. And so accepting that and acknowledging that is really important, as opposed to worrying about it and feeling crappy about ourselves. We might have a moment of grief. We might need to prep to really process that, but then we have to move forward. So I just wanted to say that as an aside. So I hear you. So there's guilt. So however, I feel the guilt, and I especially now, after just having listened to what Irene was talking about, the fact that we have to be so careful to not transfer fear to them. I agree with this. So it looks like you and your husband have had some counseling with a good psychologist, which certainly helps them somewhat. But how do I reconcile the guilt I feel now that their early childhoods are over and they are left to pick up the pieces of my fears, phobias, anxieties, and shutdowns? So this is how you work with it. You do your own work. At 15 and 20, the 15-year-old is still classically, a minor within your system, but depends. Again, age doesn't determine how mature a human is. It's what they were given growing up. And so it's important that you do your work, that you work on healing your traumatic imprints, your nervous system. Looks like, thankfully, you have a good partner, a husband who will go see a therapist. So that is huge. Not many will. Work on that relationship, work on your own traumatic experiences, work on regulating. And the reason why that's so important is that when we work on our own regulation, even if our children are like 50 years old, if we are connected to them, and we are, they will somehow know that that is happening. And this is where things get a little more woo-woo and spooky, but we know that, at least the things I study, that when we change things current, it affects not only the future, but it also impacts the past in a strange, weird way, right? This is the whole quantum world. There is no time. There is no spoon, those sorts of things, right? So we need to work on ourselves, grieve, try to shift that guilt, feel the guilt, notice what it is, but stay connected to what is good. This is where gratitude can come into play, but not so much that it diminishes the need to do your own work. If they're old enough to understand, talk to them, and they may be open or they may not be. And you cannot force feed this onto any teenager, especially a teenager. But first work on yourself. Listen to the attunement that you have with them, when it might be a good time to talk to them. I will admit the littler kids are a little easier, especially when they're still in make-believe land. I've had lots of moms who have spoken to their 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds and even 8-year-olds up into that age and just say, hey, mom was really stressed when she was carrying you. And usually the kids will say, yeah, I know. Like, they'll just know. And then you can, it isn't about grieving to them and apologizing. It's just being very matter of fact. Because the moment we start to go too far down and in some ways grovel and apologize and beg for forgiveness, we come out of our own regulation and we become kind of like the child as well. So good therapy. If you can get into one of my programs, do that. Get into my free resources. Stay with counseling with your husband if you can. I did actually a video, I almost forgot, on this a little while ago on how to help kids. Crystal can pop it up under here. We say, and my husband is still in private practice, Seth, he says now to a lot of his clients who have children or teenagers, don't worry about saving for their college fund, save a therapy fund for them. Or if you can do both, do both. So that when they come to you and say, Mom or Dad, I'm really struggling with this, it's not your job to fix it. It's a professional's job to fix it. So do your own work, save some money for them, and know that you healing now is going to impact them. They're still really young. You got to understand that they are still young. And the best thing you can do is model healthy relationship with your husband. Cannot stress that enough. For those of you who have partners who are raising kids together, you have to be on the same page as your main partner or your main family system. If you have grandmas or aunties, uncles that help raise your children, there needs to be consistency. If there isn't consistency, what occurs is that little one starts to change their personality to be safe and loved by the different people. This is what creates high levels of anxiety, mental disorders, chronic illness, because it also can go into our physical system. Everyone's going to be predisposed for different things. I cannot stress that enough. If you have kiddos, you got to be on the same page. So just needed to really stress upon that because it's really, really important. So keep up the work, Fiona. Know that you are definitely in the right place, and that it's really important to just work on your own stuff, and it'll change everything else around you. I'm just going to go back to these questions here. Lost my page number. This is from Lucy. This was from email also. And they write, going to do 2 more, you guys. Hang on, Crystal. We're almost there. Okay, need some water now. So Lucy asks, can your heart rate variability be a sign of how regulated or dysregulated you are? So yes and no. So heart rate variability is our heart's ability to be variable. I know that's kind of a bad way of defining it, but our heart needs to be able to have ups and downs, right? We need to be able to have variability when we have a stress. I use that example at the very beginning about a bang outside of my house. My heart might spike a little bit, especially if I feel like an earthquakey feel in my home. We want it to be able to do that so that we can prepare for mobilization to get the heck out of the way if that bang is like an airplane coming through my house. I doubt that'll happen, but you get the picture. So it spikes. We need it to have that variability to prepare, but then we want it to be able to come down smoothly. When we are more dysregulated, it isn't necessarily that the heart doesn't have variability, because it can still spike. So this is where just measuring heart rate variability, from what I know, is not the sole factor for determining how regulated or dysregulated we are. It can be a part of it, but our trauma nervous system responses, I should say, our dysregulation versus regulation responses, it's not just governed by how our heart responds. It's governed by how our immune system responds, how our ability to stay cognitive and online responds, our ability to stay connected to our body. I know that there's a lot of talk about apps and all these things to measure heart rate and our sleep cycles. And I think those all have a place, but we also have to look at the bigger picture, because the human system is not just the heart rate. It's not just the variability of the heart rate. It is something that's important without a doubt, but it's not everything. It's not everything. And another thought, and now it's gone from my brain. I'm probably needing to stop talking soon. I'm just going to go into the comments here. Oh, yeah, that was the other thing. And the other thing too, having lived in the science worlds, and I did studies, I was in academia for a very short stint. A lot of things that we use to measure the human systems are not very accurate. Even heart rate monitors that you use on exercise bikes and the watches that we have, there's lag time, there's electrical issues that can come up if our system is not electrically sound. There's so many things that impact these devices that we use to measure. And at the end of the day, I always prefer my students to be able to tune into their own internal physiology. And I'll speak to that for a quick sec. In exercise science, and this is my first study in love for 10 years in my 20s, we used to say to people, this is the heart rate that you need to be at to have aerobic fitness, to train your aerobic fitness. And so we'll use this number. It used to be like 220 minus your age, and then you take a percentage of that. The trouble with that is that if our immune system is, say, compromised, if we're fighting a cold, if we didn't have enough sleep, if we didn't have enough good food that day or enough water, our entire system is going to be different, and that number isn't going to register equally with intensity. So we actually might be lower on our heart rate, but our intensity feels like it's a 9 out of 10, right? And so it's important to, in my opinion, learn how to listen to your own physiology, get to know it through feeling. It's called interoception, the perception of our internal physiology, so that we can really be better at listening to ourselves without having these devices to tell us. Because the other thing is, when we look at a device to tell us, we stop connecting to what we're actually feeling. Right? It's like the apps that remind us to take a breath or to pause. Again, those can be helpful, but if that's the only thing that's telling us when to take a rest or to pause or to drink water, we're becoming robots, and we're not robots. We're organic creatures, and we need to shift and change based on environment and based on our physical systems. Okay. I'm going to go to a question I'm seeing here from Tom. Let me just have a little more to drink. So Tom asks, if you have lifelong problems with general anxiety and feel helped with an SSRI, so that's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, do you think that it's a proper alternative to stabilize your system, or does it do more harm than good? I wish I could answer that cut and dry, Tom. Everyone is different. And I am not a psychiatrist. I am not an MD. I will speak to what I've seen. So I have seen with some folks, certain psychiatric meds can definitely help stabilize the system. What I do know is that many of these things were not developed for long-term use. They were developed, and I don't know my whole history. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, talks a bit more about pharmaceuticals. He was one of the first people, I think, to prescribe some of these drugs for anxiety and for depression. So even he will say, these things were not meant for long-term use. They were meant for post-combat, for intense traumas, like if a mother loses a child and they just can't cope, so that she can sleep, so that the father can sleep. I mean, big events. But what's happening is we're using a lot of these psychiatric meds for anxiety and situations that are a result of general, I say that with air quotes, general dysregulation as a result of early adversity and trauma. And if we don't work on that early root layer that caused the general anxiety, it'll be very difficult to shift off of these. So again, everyone's different. You have to be smart. You've got to listen to your gut. I've worked with a lot of people who will be struggling to get off of some of these medications, and they'll say to me, I remember when I first started to take them, I didn't want to, but I did anyway because my doctor said to, and then they regret. So again, everyone's different. You've got to really, really, really listen to your system. The one thing I do know, and there's conflicting advice, and this is not it looks like what you're using, but the benzodiazepines are the ones that I do recommend people stay away from, because the after effects, the side effects, and the withdrawal symptoms are worse than the trauma and anxiety that the people had going into using these drugs. So just be really smart, be really mindful and bodyful of your system. And if you can, do the work to regulate and work on the root reason on why that anxiety is there in the first place, alongside. And then again, it all comes down to working with your medical professional to be able to shift this. Okay. And Alexandra, thanks for your honesty. You say great marketing, please help. Yeah, I'm teaching a lot of education here, and I'm telling a lot of people about my resources and my programs. I cannot, just like a surgeon couldn't do an appendectomy over the internet, I cannot do one-on-one work and group work in this Facebook forum. It's not ethical. Legally, I can't do that. So I'm here to provide information. The free resources I do have can guide you through some real basic practices. There's enough content, obviously, on my YouTube channel and blog to last you a lifetime. And the work has to be done in a more practical, contained way where you are agreeing to doing work with me and my team. I can't offer all of the pieces that I know through this medium, just like I couldn't start doing a therapy session with you here. It's not legal, it's not ethical. So I appreciate your honesty, and I am helping many through these educational pieces and through the programs I offer. So if you can check those out, I do recommend it. And that's all for today. I think I'm going to close up. Remember, again, if you haven't watched from the beginning, I mentioned some really important pieces at the beginning. super important for our current time right now, April 2020. I'm really urging all of you to understand why we might be feeling intensity that's happening right now. And for many of us, while it has to do with current world events, if we're feeling scared and unsafe, and we actually are in a safe home, and we have food and we have shelter and we have ways of connecting with people, whether it's through social media, telephone, Zoom, or if we live with people, if we're feeling an underlying sense of huge terror, horror, anxiety, there's a large probability that this is old. And the current situation is, I'm thinking of the sea, the ocean, the underbelly of the ocean floor, like the deep, deep, deep underbelly of the earth is being brought up. It's being excavated. It's being shooken up so that we can really feel what we all have individually been holding, but also collectively here on planet Earth. So I cannot stress enough, find a way to do some of this work. There are again, many resources on my site that can get you started. There are programs, or find a good somatic practitioner. Watch the video I did on how to find a good somatic practitioner. And we'll be back again next week. I got through most of the questions, I think, that were submitted this week. Thank you for submitting them. Again, I start with the ones that we get through email. So get on my email list if you haven't already. That will make sure that you get our new videos as they come out. I had a new video come out last Sunday, all on the importance of staying sane in somatic and stressful times. So check that out. I'm going to have a new one coming out on Sunday about what to do when you want to hit your kids in these times of stress. So if you have kids, if you live with partners, animals, and you're feeling frustration and anger, and you're feeling a desire to lash out, whether to them or to yourself, please watch that video. And then the one coming up after that, we're going to be talking about safety. So we're going to just keep doing more and more education. Thank you, everybody, for being here and hanging out. I'm not sure how many were here today. Like I said, our Facebook platform is completely different, so I'm learning too. Lots of love. Thank you for the thank yous. Thank you for the fun hearts and emojis and fun little giffies there. I will talk to everyone later. Take very good care. Stay safe, be well, stay somatic, stay sane. Connect to the things that you're feeling. Do not brush them away. They're there for a reason. They are medicine for you if you're willing to let them be that way. All right. Lots of love, everyone. Bye for now.